All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. I've been wanting to try and do something like this for a little bit. To give you a little bit of a background, there is a website called Bundle of Holding. I've mentioned it a couple different places. I really like it because they'll have these little bundles of RPGs that you can get. And they generally tend to be pretty nice deals. And so I wanted the issue, quote unquote, with them is they are limited time things. You generally only have like a couple weeks to be able to pick them up, meaning if I was to do an in-depth review of them, there's a good chance that a lot of people wouldn't see the in-depth review until after it was done, or I wouldn't realize the bundle of holding was there until there was only 2 days left or something like that. So I got an email today about this RPG system, Mutant Year Zero, and I'm going to see if how you guys like this. Currently, there are two Mutant Year Zero bundles on Bundle of Holding. They're going to be there until hold please. Where are you? Through Monday, the 27th of June. So you have a little under 3 weeks from when I'm recording this to be able to pick these up at that price. After that, they go up to the normal price. You have to get them from Modifius, from their website, which is a little bit more confusing and definitely more expensive. So, that being said, let's talk about this review. By the way, there will be links in the description below. The first one will be to the Bundle of Holding bundle. Like I said, that's only good through the 27th of June. And then the second one will be to Modifius's actual website where you can actually buy the physical books and things like that. So, the book today that I am going to be reviewing is not the entire bundle. The entire bundle would drive me nuts going through everything because there's like 4 core books in there and a bunch of other things, depending on which bundle that you could get. I am specifically reviewing Mutant Year Zero, the core book, just the original Mutant Year Zero core book. They have, from what I can tell, they have 3 kind of expansions to it that allow you to play different groups of characters. Mutant Year Zero, you literally play a mutant. They have other ones that introduce anthropomorphized animals. They have one that introduces robots. And they also have one that introduces just regular humans that aren't mutants. So they have all those different source books. The one that I'm covering today is just Mutant Year Zero, the one specifically about playing mutants in a post-apocalyptic society. Now, to explain how I do these in-depth reviews, when I say in-depth review, I mean that. I go in-depth. I go chapter by chapter. I talk about the things I like, talk about the things I don't like. I talk about the things that I think they did well. I talk about the things that I think they need to change in the next printing, stuff like that. It is very, very in-depth. Most of these go anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours long. A lot of people don't want to sit through 2 hours of a video just to figure out if they want to buy something. So, the beginning of all these in-depth reviews, I have a little section where I just go, should you buy it? And I separate potential buyers into 3 different groups. Those groups are players, DMs, and what I call lore hounds. Players are exactly that. They're people that are going to be sitting at the table on the other side of the GM screen with the other players. They're going to create characters that they're going to play in the world. GMs are, again, exactly that. They're the people that are going to be sitting behind the GM screen. They're going to be running the game. They have different needs. They are looking for different things in products. And then the final group is what I call lore hounds. Lore hounds are people that may never sit down at a tabletop and actually play a game, but they really like stories and they really like lore and things like that. So I will always kind of separate into these 3 different groups. So, should you buy that? Well, let's talk about that. First things first, should you buy it, players? So Mutant Year Zero, as far as I can tell, is a unique RPG system, and by that I mean this is not like a modification of another system that already exists. Like Avatar Legends was a version or was based on the Powered by the Apocalypse rule set. This seems to be a wholly unique we'll try this again. RPG system that was developed specifically for this, and it shows. Like nothing in here feels kind of nothing in here feels like it was shoehorned in because it exists in the system. We have to find a way to use it. The system itself, for players, this is a post-apocalyptic society, and the mutants that you play are fighting against not only the environment and existence, but their own bodies. Everything decays in this. Your character themselves is kind of a ticking time bomb. One of the plot points that they mention in here is the people, which is what they use to refer to, your society. The people are barren. There are no children. All of the people, aside from one, the kind of leader of the group, are all around, roughly the same age. They're young adults. And none of them, but young adults, I mean like late teens, early 20s, that kind of age range. And there are no children, and none of them can have children as far as they are aware. They are all completely barren. So nobody is older than 30 other than this one, their leader. And so, yeah, if they don't figure out something, their society is just going to end. People will die. People die on a regular basis. It's one of the mechanics of this system. So this is, very, very post-apocalyptic, very, very kind of depressing, very, very survival-oriented. So if you're a player that is looking for something like this, this is a pretty interesting system. It's also a relatively non-complex system. You have 4 attributes, and I have to go through this really, really quick so that I don't forget anything here. Yeah. So you have 4 attributes: strength, agility, wits, and empathy. They can have scores anywhere from 1 to 5, and there's some rules based on your roles or your archetypes or whatever they're called. Let's see if I can find out what they could call them in this. I just read it. Basically, your class. I can't remember what they use to call classes, but yeah. So it's effectively your stats are only going to be between 1 and 5. There are skills; those can have skill levels, which again between 1 or 5, and the dice that you use for this, they're all to d6s. Now they do mention that you're technically supposed to use special dice for this, and they also have special decks of cards for your mutations and special decks of none of that stuff is required. All of it is already in the core book, and you can just roll dice in order to do anything that would normally require drawing from a deck or something like that. But this entire system is kind of built to sell you those things. Like there are card decks for so many different things, which I'm not particularly fond of. Like I said, none of them are required to play. Like the special dice that you use, all they are is the 6s on those dice are replaced with a biohazard symbol, and the ones on a couple of the dice are replaced with a different symbol, but everything else is the same. And the way rolls work in this is The only rolls you actually care about are 6s and 1s, depending on what you're rolling. 6s are successes, and 1s are epic failure kind of things that cause bad things to happen. They can lead to your mutant slowly decaying and losing stat points and the things like that. So they mention right in here, again, you can just use regular dice. However, it is very, very useful to have 3 different colors of the dice, which if you are someone like me that plays RPGs a lot, it's really not that difficult to find 3 different colors of D6s. Worst case scenario, most friendly local game stores will let you buy cubes of D6s in multiple colors. Again, at most, you will only ever be rolling 5 of any color. So at most, you need a dice pool of 15 D6s in 3 different colors. It seems like a lot. It's not. Again, it's a really simplistic mechanic. The higher your skill point, the higher your attribute points, and the higher your gear score, which is if you're using an item to do something, gives you more dice, which gives you more chances to roll. And I think, I don't think you can actually roll 15. I think 13 is the highest, because gear, I think you can only have up to 3 gear dice. But anyways, so that's kind of the basis of this system. Is you decide to do things, you choose a number, or you get a number of dice based on your skill score and your attribute score. You add in gear score, you roll, and then things happen. One of the unique things about this as a system is they specifically mention failure has consequences. Kind of similar to the idea of Open Legends, all rolls matter. This one is when you fail, and something bad will happen when you fail. And I think that's kind of interesting, but it does, if you are a player, you have to come into the game with this mindset of, okay, this is going to be a stressful game. This is not a game that is actively trying to kill the players. This isn't, Tomb of Horrors or anything like that. But it is something where if you want to go in and, just kind of gung-ho do whatever you want, your character's probably going to die pretty quickly, because your choices do matter, and bad choices have bad consequences. So I think that's interesting. The other thing about this, as much as they do have roles, that's what they call them, roles are your classes. As much as you do have roles, which I think they introduce like 8 in the core book, and they introduce more roles in later supplements and other things like that. But as much as you do have roles, your role really only, as far as like how your character plays, your role is really only going to affect your highest attribute, because that's the one attribute that you can start with a 5 in it. Your max, you can have a maximum of 5, and whichever role you choose, it'll say your key attribute is this. So it does that, where you'll have one attribute that you're really good at, and it'll give you a specialist skill. That is a skill that no other role can do. And then it'll give you your starting talent, which is effectively your abilities. It's how you kind of define what your character does. Some talents actually let you do things. Some just change how your character is built. They make you harder to hit or things like that. But that's basically what it is. And they'll help define. They can help you to define your relationship with other players and within PvP scenes. And the other thing that's really important is you pick your big dream, which is the goal of your character. And your gear is kind of limited by your role. So the role is really important when you start the game and when you build it. But as you level up, there are no, quote unquote levels. You gain experience every time you get 5 experience. You get to pick a new talent, or you can do a couple other things. But that's, when you level up, you just pick something new. So as much as you might think that this is a class-based RPG, this is much closer to a skill-based RPG, with starting classes. Like you have your roles at the beginning, but everything else is very, very wide open. And mutations are not limited to your class in any way, shape, or form. Mutations are random. You generally don't get to choose them, and they massively change how your character plays and things like that. So for players, this is not a game where you can learn the system and kind of create the exact character you want. This is a game that is kind of chaotic. You are going to get mutations. You don't choose when you get mutations. You don't get to choose your mutations. They just happen. So this is very much an idea of directing chaos more than it is creating that character that you really, really wanted to play. So yeah, overall, I think the book itself, according to Bundle of Holding, the book, the PDF retails at $20. I have not found a place where you can buy the PDF by itself anywhere other than Bundle of Holding, and the only way you can buy it there is through this bundle. You can't just buy this. I have been able to find the hardcover, which, from what I can tell, it looks like if you buy the hardcover, you get the PDF for free, but don't quote me on that, because different websites have said different things, so I'm not 100% certain. However, the number I've seen most often for the hardcover is around $40. $42, somewhere in there. So, do I think that this book is worth $40 for players? Yes and no. Again, this is a much different RPG than if you're used to traditional kind of D&D style RPGs, or anything kind of remotely similar to it. Pathfinder, really most RPGs where you kind of build this idea of a character in your head and you play it. This is not going to feel great because you are not going to have a ton of control over your characters because of the mutations and because of other things built into the system. This is a little bit more randomized as far as characters. You still can create an interesting character that you like, but you're going to get these curveballs thrown at you every so often that you're going to have to kind of incorporate. And the system itself is built out of relationships and your big dream. So you will have relationships that will kind of dictate how you want to do things. You can change those relationships and things like that if they're not working with how your character is now. And you will have your big dream. This is your goal for your character. And you will always be working towards it. So from a storytelling perspective, I think it's really good. I think the system gets out of your way when you want to tell interesting stories, but it is a very bleak story. It is a stressful kind of game. So if you're okay with the idea that you might get a mutation that vastly changes what you think about your character, I say yeah, go ahead. I think $40 for the book. I think it's worth $40 for a hardcover, especially if it comes with a PDF. The price on Bundle of Holding, they say it retails it to $20. I would say this is definitely worth $20. And the actual bundle itself, again, before I say the wrong thing, I'm actually going to look here. That wasn't what I wanted. That's the one I want. Okay, so the actual bundle itself, the way that a lot of these bundles work on Bundle of Holding is you will have a starter collection and then a bonus collection where you have your minimum donation, and then if you want to go a little bit higher and meet what more than the average donation, you get some extra stuff. So the starter collection is $9.95. It comes with Mutant Year Zero, the GM screen, and then 2 what are called zone sectors, which are basically little areas that are mostly going to be used by the GM to give your give the players places to kind of interact with and explore and things like that. So, do I think this core book is worth to the $10? Hell yeah. I think for players, like I said, the only caveat I'll put in is understand this is not quite the RPG that you're going to think it is when you first start out. Your role is kind of important at character creation, but as soon as you get away from character creation, your character is going to grow and change based on the talents that you choose and based on the mutations that you get given. So you have control over the talent aspect. You do not have control of the mutations. And some characters will get more mutations than others because it's based on die rolls, and mutations will cause your attribute stats to lower and things like that. So it is a weird system. But if you're up for something weird, yeah, I definitely recommend it. So, moving on. The next group. Should GMs buy this? One of the interesting things about this core book is the core book is actually split up into 2 sections. And this is something I've never seen. I personally have never seen this in a book, and I think it's an interesting way to do this. The first 8 chapters are called the Players section, and they're actually color-coded. The sides of the pages are actually like this kind of burnt orange color. And that's what players do. And players never need to look in the second section at all. Everything they will ever need to build their characters and play the game is in the Players section. Then you have the Game Master section, the chapters 9 through 16, and this has all the information for running games in this system. And I think one of the most interesting things about this is in the beginning of the book, there is actually a little aside. In black, it's got kind of yellow hazard tape around it to kind of draw people's eyes to it. And it says, warning to players, don't read section 2. If you're a player in this game and not the GM, you should not read section 2 of this book. Chapters 9 through 16 are for GM's eyes only. This is especially important for chapter 16, which contains huge spoilers for the meta plot and backstory of the game. If you read it beforehand, you'll ruin the fun for yourself. And that is something I think is really, really interesting. Is the GM section, the GM knows things that the players don't. Knows a lot of things that the players don't. To the point where there's a term in storytelling called the unreliable narrator. And basically this idea is when you are interacting with a story, when you are reading or watching or whatever a story, every so often you have this experience called the unreliable narrator, where the person that is telling the story or however you are getting the story is actually not telling you the truth, or is hiding certain details or the things like that. And so the story that you think you are watching won't always make sense, because lies in general cause contradictions and things like that. And eventually, the unreliable narrator is kind of shown to the audience, and you find out that, oh, what I thought was happening wasn't really happening. It's a really interesting device to use, especially in RPGs. The idea of the unreliable narrator can be really, really useful, specifically when you're dealing with things like insight checks or things like that in D&D, where people are trying to ascertain if something is true or not. Using the idea of an unreliable narrator, you can introduce false information to the players that they think is true. And you don't tell them that it's not true. You don't tell them what the result of their roll was or if they passed or failed. You just tell them, these are the things that you learned. And you treat it as fact. And then the players eventually have to kind of find out, well, apparently this isn't true. And it can actually It can actually be a really, really fun experience. This whole system is built around that unreliable narrator aspect. I'm not going to go into specifics because I don't want to spoil it, but there are certain aspects of this world that are not quite the way that they are explained, and certain things are not going to make sense to the players as they continue playing, and that's the point of the game. Yes, you get to, exist in this post-apocalyptic wasteland, and you go out and you find stuff, you come back and you try and build up your civilization, which is your settlement is called the Ark. So yeah, there's all that stuff, but there's also this meta plot underneath everything else that the players will slowly start unraveling. Now, something that I think is a slight detriment to this is the reason they have that little warning in there for players is once a player has played through a campaign, which can last a decent amount of time. This is not going to be, like a 5 or 7 year long campaign or anything like that. The meta plot itself, depending on how often you play, I would say you can probably figure out everything. With weekly games, you could probably do it in less than a year, which for an RPG is not a huge amount of time. Again, obviously, you can make it longer or shorter or whatever. You could get through the entire quote unquote meta plot in a couple months if you really wanted to and you're playing long enough. What I'm saying, this is not this is not designed to be a super long form style thing. And once you learn the meta plot, one of the biggest kind of driving forces of kind of mid to late game parts of this game is gone and can never really be brought back. Now, they do have some suggestions for how to create your own meta plots, and they have some suggestions for different meta plots. But a large portion of this book is built around solving that one big meta plot to the point where the players, a lot of the suggested big dreams that they have are directly tied to that original meta plot, which involves this location that's referred to as Eden. So it's interesting that effectively this is an RPG with a plot, as opposed to most RPGs where they just have a world and you have to come up with a plot yourself. This RPG actually has a plot, and it makes it an interesting thing to run. And like I said, you don't have to follow that plot, but if you aren't going to be following that plot at character creation, you have to explain to the players that this isn't the plot that we're following for this particular adventure. So playing multiple campaigns in this system will take a little bit more work, mostly because everything is built around following that initial meta plot, and if you want to do something different than that, you do have to add your own changes into the things to the system. Are they super difficult? No, but it's something as a GM you need to understand, is if you do want to tell, just using the system itself to tell your own story, you're going to have to put a little bit of work, not just because they didn't give you the information, but because the game itself is built around this initial plot line. I know that sounds kind of railroady. It's not. I don't want to go into I don't want to go into too many details because I don't want to give away some of the cool stuff that's in here. But understand if you're okay letting the book take the reins as far as like the direction the campaign goes in, and everything else, other than that quote unquote meta plot, everything else is mostly random. Like, this is a really kind of good randomized system where you can have the players literally go out into the zone, that's the apocalyptic area outside of the Ark, and they can choose to go wherever they want, and you will have a table to roll on different events and things like that, and no matter what they do, you have a solution for it. And there's stuff that happens back at the art as well. And they have a ton of suggested events that can happen there. And so there is a ton here that makes your job as GMing significantly easier, because there's so many little bits that they give you, and little tools and little plot points that you can use or not use whenever you want. And they're generic enough that you can tell whatever story you want, and just use these as little events to tell this as a story. Like I said, the only real limitation is that meta plot is built in, and it's a cool idea. I'm very much thrilled with it. So overall, for the $10 bundle of holding, do I think this is worth it for GMs? Yeah, definitely. I think $10 is a steal for this. For the $40 physical copy of this that I've seen most other places, do I think this is worth it for the GMs? I do. There's enough here that, again, even if you're not going to use this particular system, a lot of the events are not really tied to the system. You know, they it's not like they give you stat blocks and everything of this event. No, it's much more kind of freeform, and they're much closer to just ideas of scenarios and things like that. And if you want to run a post-apocalyptic style adventure as part of a campaign, or a campaign on its own, like, you can take a lot of stuff from this book just directly out of the book and insert it into a new system without really needing to make any changes to it per se, because the suggestions and things like that are not, again, built around the system. They're built around the stories. So yeah, I think even like if you're going for like the $42 hardcover, I think this is worth it. I think there's a lot you can get out of this. There's also a couple different maps. The artwork in it is interesting. It has a very comic book feel to it. But they actually have two different maps that you can use when playing it that are actually based on real locations. Slight spoiler alert, very, very slight. One of them is based on post-apocalyptic London, and one of them is based on post-apocalyptic New York City. And if you look at the maps, it's blatantly obvious what they are. Like the one that's post-apocalyptic London, there's this giant river that flows through this area, and near the middle of the map is a large dilapidated structure that has a clock face on it, and they call it Old Ben. I wonder what that is referencing. And then for New York, it's a bunch of rivers, and there's islands in there, and in the middle of a large body of water is this statue of a woman that has fallen into disarray, and she has a torch, and who could figure out what that is? So it's not like it's this huge thing, but you are, discovering a post-apocalyptic world, and it also means that you can literally take any real life city. I could choose the small little town that I live in, take a Google Maps picture of it, put a grid on it, and go, there is our post-apocalyptic society. And that's what we're doing. Like, it's cool that you can do stuff like that. So yeah, overall for GMs, I recommend both. I definitely recommend the bundle, but even outside the bundle, if you just pick up the hardcover, I think this is a good tool to have in your GM belt, whether you want to play this system or not. So yes. Moving on. The final group, Lore Hounds. This is another one of those books where they really went the extra mile for lore. However, the way that they present it, again, that 2-section system that they have, where this is the player section, this is the GM section, and all the cool secrets in the GM section. Well, guess what? If you're a lore hound, you're gonna want to read the GM section, because that's where all the juicy stuff is. But the way that they built it, I think it's more fun to play the game and learn the lore as you play than it is to just read it. That being said, there's enough lore here that it is a satisfying read. I read the whole book, which I normally don't do for these reviews. I generally I will read most of the book and I'll look at mechanics and things like that, but I won't read every single thing because I just don't have the time to do it. But this one, once I started getting to the lore stuff, the stuff that I normally will just kind of glance through and get a basic idea of what it is, I couldn't stop reading. And I didn't read absolutely every single word of text in here, but I read the vast majority of it, and it's really good. So yeah, if you're a lore hound, there's a lot you can get out of this, and I guess the unique thing about this is so much of the kind of interpersonal lore and the stuff that's not a part of the meta plot is actually created by the players. The players create their own arc. They decide what it's made in. Maybe it's a beached cruise liner. Maybe it's an old mall. Like, the players get to choose that at character creation. They get to choose the various bosses that are in there. The different forms. They get to choose the kind of population of people that are in there. Like, so much of the lore is actually built by the players. So yeah. So for Lorehound specifically, for the bundle price, not only do I recommend getting the bundle, the extended version adds in a second core book with even more stuff. And when I got it, I think the average price was 20 and change. So you just had to pay like 21 or 22 bucks, and you could get all of it. But for $10, do I think this is a good investment for a player? Yeah, definitely. Or not a player, for a lorehound? Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of really interesting stuff. Do I think the $40 hardcover would be worth it? For a lorehound, I think that'd be a bit of a hard sell for me because, yeah, the artwork is really, really cool. I really enjoy the maps. I think the maps are really interesting and fun. Just because it took me a minute because they introduce the London map for first, and it took me a few minutes to realize, after looking at Old Ben, and I was like, Old Ben, is that? Oh, that must be Big Ben, and that must be, oh, that's the River Thames. Oh, that makes so much more sense. So it took me that extra second to go, oh my God, this is effectively what London would look like without all the buildings and streets in it. And I thought that was kind of interesting and fun. So yeah, overall, Lorehounds, I would say buy the bundle. It's definitely worth it. If you can find the PDF somewhere after the bundle is ended, I still think if you can find the PDF for $20, I still think it's worth it. Once you start getting into the $40 price range for the physical book, that's when I would start going, well, how important is it to have something cool physically? Because I don't think there's quite enough lore here to justify $42 to $2. If you're never going to play. If you think someday you may go from Lorehound to player or Lorehound to GM, then yeah, pick it up. So, quick review. Players... for all three groups, the bundle is recommended. Yes, $10 is a steal for this game. For players, I think the physical version is probably going to be a bit of a hard sell for players, but I still think it's worth it if you are okay with a bit more of a randomized playstyle. You get to choose your role. You get to choose your talents. Which are basically your new skills, your new abilities as you level up. You will not get to choose your mutations. And your mutations will happen randomly, and they will hurt your characters sometimes. So if you're okay with that little bit of giving up that little bit of control to just kind of embrace the chaos, then yeah, definitely go for this. For GMs, like I said, I think both the bundle and the hardcover are worth it. The system itself, I think, is solid. I think it's fun. And the GM section, I think itself is really good. But also, if you just want ideas about how to run a post-apocalyptic style game, or a kind of survival survival style game. It doesn't have to be post-apocalyptic. It could just be they're stranded, in the Shadowfell, and have to deal with a severe lack of supplies and the things like that. Even if you just want ideas about how to run a campaign like that, this is a good pickup for you, because so many of the things in here can be switched to almost any other system, because they are story ideas, not so much mechanical encounters, and I like that. And then for Lorehounds, like I said, the PDF I think is worth it at both $10 and $20. Once you get to the physical copy, I think there's not quite enough to justify like a $42 purchase for this. So those are my recommendations. If you just came here for a recommendation, thank you for showing up. Remember to like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What is your favorite post-apocalyptic trope? And that can be like settings. Do you like zombie apocalypses? Do you like, nuclear winters? Stuff like that. Let me know in the comments down below. Or just, character tropes or things like that. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I think it's time for us to jump into the in-depth review. Quick reminder, this is... Come on, there we go. This is an in-depth review. What does that mean? That means I go in-depth. And I say this over and over again because some people kind of get confused. I'm going to go chapter by chapter and talk about everything about this. I'm not going to be giving away spoilers or anything like that. I'm not going to be giving away how to physically play the game. There should be no possible way that you can watch this video and be able to play the game without purchasing it. That is something I make a huge effort to ensure I don't do that. That being said, this is going to get kind of technical. That being said, let's start with the players section. Again, chapters 1 through 8 are called the players section. This is geared towards players. Chapter 1, The People at the End of Time. This is your introduction to RPGs chapter. And again, based on other introduction to RPG, what is an RPG chapter? This is a pretty good one. It starts off with a description of the setting itself. And it's a really, really nice, well-written description. It takes about half a page and ends with, "This is year 0." And I love that. It sets up the game. It gets you your expectations. It lets you know exactly what you should be expecting from it. And then it starts explaining a little bit more of what's an RPG and some stuff specifically tied to the game, like things like the assembly, which is something that happened at the beginning of sessions, and we'll get into that a little more as we go along. Something I do like about this that tends to be absent from a lot of what is an RPG chapter is this doesn't differentiate between this is what RPGs are and this is what this particular RPG is. It does have that little section like this is what an RPG is, this is called rolling, this is your characters and stuff like that. Has that, but inside of those sections it also has all the stuff that you do in this. Like resources are a really, really big deal in here. There is no money in year 0. So you have to, like they talk about the idea of you have to fight for grub, water, and bullets. Grub and water, exactly that. You need food, you need water. If you don't get enough of them, it actually hurts your characters. When you take damage, and you can take damage in all of your attributes, can be reduced damage, but your kind of general damage reduces your strength attribute. In order to get that back to heal, you need to eat. Your wit, your kind of thinking attribute, is restored, your agility. Your agility is restored by water. You have to sit down and drink water to restore those points. And then bullets are used not only, like, there are firearms, but they're also used kind of as a form of currency. You trade bullets for other items and things like that. And so they take all of that into account when they're also explaining, well, this is how an RPG works, and this is how this particular RPG works. And I think it meshes together well. This would not be a good book to give to someone that just wanted to know what RPGs are like, because it is highly specialized for this system. But if you're going to be, you know, especially if this is your first RPG, this is a great chapter that introduces you to the idea of RPGs and all of the kind of unique aspects of this particular RPG, all for one. And it's really, really cool. It's really well written. There's tons of illustrations that are beautifully done. Like I said, they have a very comic book, almost kind of a graphic novel art style, and it's really, really cool. And yeah, and then they talk about other things like, you know, fast forwarding. You know, the idea that you're not going, you know, in-game time and IRL time are two different things. They talk about team play versus individual play, where splitting the party versus keeping them together, and how that's taken care of. They do something like I find kind of interesting in here with the use of pronouns. And before you think this is getting political, it's not. What it is when they use pronouns in here, when they refer to PCs and NPCs, they will use the pronoun he for things like that. Anytime they refer to the GM, they will use the pronoun she. Now, politics aside, I find that to be really, really interesting as a form of verbal shorthand, to where whenever you see, basically, whenever you see a female pronoun, you know this is stuff that they're referring to the GM. And whenever you see a male pronoun, this is stuff that's referring to the players and characters specifically. I think it's an interesting thing to do. Again, I don't think it's bad or good. I've never seen it done that way before. And I'm a huge fan of shorthand in general, as long as it's not like abused and you know, used to remove creativity. It's a very, very useful tool to have. Shorthand in general, it's the reason shorthand exists is so you can get complex ideas down very, very quickly. So yeah. And then they have a thing where it says a typical session, where it kind of explains how a session will go. And that's it. It is a really well written what is an RPG chapter. It gets the thing I like the most about it is normally a what is an RPG chapter doesn't really give you a feel for how this game is going to be played. It's meant for people that have never played an RPG before, and it tends to come off as slightly confusing because they're explaining the world of RPGs without getting into, okay, how is this particular game? Generally, you'll have another chapter, or they'll explain it through multiple chapters as they explain each part of this as a system. This one, really down and dirty. This is how the game is played. This is what it's going to be like to feel it, to play it. This is what it's going to feel like. These are the things that you're going to say, or things you're going to see. It starts on chapter 7, or it starts on page 7, goes to page 15. So you're really only looking at about 8 pages worth of stuff, and yet in that 8 pages, I had a really good idea of what it was going to be like to play. Now, I didn't know all the minutia about, what are roles going to be like, and, all that other stuff that they'll explain later, but I had a good idea of what it was going to be like to play this game, and that's a hard thing to pull off. I've mentioned in other books, I like it when they introduce the system before they start introducing, character creation and stuff like that. for this reason. I want to know what the game is going to be like. And again, for people that are kind of shopping around where they're not 100% certain if this is the game that they want to play, this chapter is a really, really great way to get a feel for, is this the kind of game that I want to play? It's great. It's amazing. And I love everything about it. So, yeah, great chapter 1. Moving on. Chapter 2. Your Mutant. This is your character creation chapter. It gives so I like the fact that it starts off with attributes and it tells you what all those do. It talks about skills, it talks about talents, it talks about mutations, but it doesn't actually give you any of those things. And I've mentioned before, that is an important thing to do. Explain how the system works before you start asking the player to make choices that are going to affect what they can and can't do in the game. So explain the system first so that they have something that kind of makes sense when they start making choices. So in that instance, I think this is nice. It gives all the big ideas that you're going to be dealing with in here. And there's plenty of examples as well. And then before they get into you creating your own character, they actually give you an example character sheet right in here, and they use the character sheets. The one problem I have with the character sheets that come with this, none of them are form fillable. Seriously, folks, you are selling PDFs of your character sheets. Don't make us print them out. Make them form fillable, especially for someone like me that, because I am right-handed and I have a tremor in my right hand, writing things by hand is not something I do. If you require me to write things down, I will actively avoid whatever it is, because writing is incredibly difficult for me and it is not fun, and 9 times out of 10 I can't read what I write after I'm done with it. So make these form fillable. That being said, it's really, really nice. And again, it's very similar to the Marvel multiverse role-playing game, where they don't explain any of this stuff in here. They just kind of give an example of, okay, here is the final results. Go for it. Figure, this is what it's going to look like. Now we're going to explain everything. So I like that. And then they start talking about things like relationships and dreams, which is a huge, huge part of this. This is a system, and your relationships with the other player characters are a big deal. That's one of the things that you have to choose at character creation, is every single other character in the game, you have to write down your relationship to them. And they give you some ideas for relationships, but you don't have to use those. And I like it. And it's not a huge detailed thing. It is a 1-sentence description of your relationship with someone. When we get to the roles, I'll read a few to give you an idea. And it talks about your gear and encumbrance and stuff like that. This is a pretty simple system for encumbrance and things like that. I'm not a fan of encumbrance systems. They're boring and they're math in a game series that already requires a ton of math. This is a simple encumbrance system, and it's really just there to prevent people from, just carrying everything they ever find ever. There needs to be some limitations on that, especially in a survival-based RPG where resources are short. Your encumbrance should be a resource. Then they talk about things like your den. Like you'll have inside of the Ark, which is your city that you live in, your little town that you live in, you will also have your own den. And you get to decide where in the town it is. And, because, again, resources are limited, you are never 100% safe. Even when you're in the Ark, even when you're in your own den, your stuff might get stolen if somebody else, thinks it's useful. So depending on where your den is, might influence how careful you have to be when you go to sleep. Stuff like that. Then they talk about developing your mutant. Basically, how do you quote-unquote level up? There aren't quote-unquote levels in this. It's just you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have 7 questions at the end of a session that you ask. If you answer yes to any of those questions, you get an experience point. As soon as you get 5 experience points, you can either raise a skill of your choice by 1 level or learn 1 new talent. And then once you make the improvement, you start over again. So every time you get 5 experience, and you get experience by answering these questions like, did you participate in the session? If you were there, you get an experience point, which I like. Did you sacrifice or risk something for your PC buddy is another example question. They have these specific questions, and anytime you answer yes, you get an XP. So I like that. XP is entirely story based. It's not, you kill this monster and you get 13 experience from it. No, it's, what story did you tell? And even if your particular character didn't really expand their story much, just for being there, you're going to get some sort of experience. And then as you do more things, you learn more. You have a chance to expand and grow. And because this is in the player section, everyone is aware of these questions. So that can also influence role-playing choices. And it kind of incentivizes you to really look at your relationships. You will have relationships with other players, and one of them will be called your PC buddy. That is the person that you are closest to. You will also have one NPC that you hate, and you have one NPC that you want to keep safe. This is all decided at character creation. And the questions that you ask involve, your relationship with these NPCs and with the other PCs. So it really, it will influence the decisions that you make in the game, because you know that, these questions are going to be coming at the end of a session. And if you want your story to continue and your character to evolve, you need to be thinking about these. So yeah, overall, super cool. And then the other thing that's kind of cool, the Ark, your little town that you live in. The Ark is effectively another character that is created by everyone, and you actually develop the Ark itself. At the beginning of every session, you have this thing called Assembly, where each one of the player characters will suggest to the entire civilization, which is, they recommend you have your city to have around 200 people. Because people are going to die over the course of the game. It's built into it. At the end of every day, a certain number of people die, depending on how developed your arc is. And the players get to make recommendations to the whole group, the whole society. Hey, I think this is what we should focus on, this week or whatever. And as your arc gets more developed, less people die every day. It gives you new options. Like, it's a really, really cool mechanic that the city you live in is its own character. And I love that. I think it's super, super cool. They go more into it a little later. And then the very next section, they show the different roles. Each role is exactly 2 pages. The first page is a picture of an example character, really nice picture, and a brief paragraph describing them. To give you an idea, I'll read you what the description of the Enforcer is. The Enforcer is the first role that they show, and the description is, every day is a fight for survival. No one knows that better than you. As long as you can remember, you've been fighting for grub, for bullets, for respect. Your knuckles and your soul are hardened. Crushing a jaw no longer hurts. You have learned the fighter's secrets. It's not about who is the strongest. Or you have learned the fighter's secret. It's not about who is the strongest. It's about who will never quit. really, really cool introduction to a role, to a class. Is this is what your role is built about. And then it gives some typical names you might use. You don't have to. Gives your key attribute, and it gives you your specialist's skill. Now, I will mention skills are not described in this chapter, and talents aren't described in this chapter. So they tell you specialist skill is intimidate for the enforcer. They don't tell you what intimidate is. So you go, okay, that's what it is. And that's one of the things I'm kind of less thrilled about. I kind of wish this skill... I guess it's a bit of a double-edged sword. If you start by explaining the skills and the talents before you show the roles, it can be a little confusing. I would almost prefer it to be take a little bit, because they did not use all the space that they had available to them. There's a lot of blank space on this page. So I would have preferred to see specialist skill intimidate, and then they describe the skill on this page. I think it would read better, and it would make more sense when you're building your character to understand exactly what it is that you're building. The same thing is true when you build a character. You can choose one of 3 talents that are exclusive to your role. And they list the 3 talents, but they don't tell you what any of them mean. And again, there's lots of empty space here. And there's more than enough space to be able to put descriptions. So even if they reprint the specialist skill and the talents in the skills section and in the talents chapter, I really would have preferred to see them here, just so that you could understand a little bit more. Because that's the only part of these role sections that doesn't make sense the first time you read it. You actually have to go to these other chapters and read them, and then come back to understand exactly what the choices you're going to be making. Every other choice that you make, you already have enough information from what you've read in the book to make the choice right now. And that's a good thing. If they just put those little extra bits of description, you literally could make your choices right now without any problem. And that's not something that generally happens in most RPGs. You know, look at D&D 5th edition, which is a really well-designed system and is a remarkably simple system to learn compared to previous versions. But it still requires you starting in the races chapter, and then going to the classes chapter, then flipping back to races, and then back to classes, then flipping to backgrounds, and then back to races. And then if you got a spellcaster, you have to go all the way to the back to look at your spell list, and then go from your spell list to the actual list of spells, so you can figure out, like, there's a lot of flipping. This, because of just how the game is built, this could be something where, as you read the book for the first time, you can build your first character if they would just add those 2 extra things. So the only issue I have is that right there, is just explain the specialist skill, explain the talents right here. Otherwise, everything else makes perfect sense. Again, they give you suggestions for your appearance. They give you suggestions for your relationships to other PCs. Again, some examples of relationships you could have to other PCs. They'll always start with ... So insert name was still standing after one of your punches. That is one of the relationships you can have with someone. Another relationship is insert name left you to die. So your relationship, and these are just with other PCs. This is not to NPCs. That's another section. This is just to PCs. You can have positive and negative relationships with the other player characters, which I like. Conflict breeds interesting resolutions of that conflict. Like, the whole point of storytelling in general is this is the day that something happened. Conflict creates stories. The only time you ever deal with the day that nothing happened is Theater of the Absurd, and that is kind of an interesting thing to experience in general. So having conflict between the other PCs, again, it's something that if you are not familiar with storytelling, you're not familiar with being able to kind of separate yourself from the character that you're portraying, it can turn things ugly really quick. But this is kind of an ugly system. And if one of your, if your character dies, again, you can just make a new character and go through the process again. And because there aren't levels or anything like that, you're not going to feel like you're massively underpowered. You're just going to have less choices in certain situations. So that's cool. Then relationships to NPCs. Again, you need one NPC that you hate. You need one NPC you need to protect. And they give examples here. To give a good example for one that you hate, the boss Jahamd, or Johamd, whatever you want to, however you want to pronounce it. You hate the boss Joe, who killed your previous boss and tortured you. So that's one person that you might hate. Another person you might hate is the fixer Milix, who you think stole your stash of grub. So that's why you hate this particular NPC. And then you need to protect the boss Marlot, who provides grub for you, or nobody. No one in this rotten world deserves to live. I love this. I love that certain roles specifically state, hey, the person that you need to protect is nobody. Doesn't mean that you don't have that aspect of your character. It means you will go out of your way. Like this particularly, it says, no one in this rotten world deserves to live. You will go out of your way to not protect someone, which is an interesting choice. And then they have your big dream. That is the other part of your character you have to build. And it gives you some examples for your big dream. Again, without going into everything. One of the examples for your big dream could be to build rather than destroy, which is a really interesting dynamic to play for a character. Especially, again, this is the enforcer. This is a very physical role. This is a character that is built around attacking and beating things up and destruction. And if your big dream is to build rather than to destroy, that is a really, really interesting thing, because your entire existence at this point is built around destruction. That's what you do best. But you want to someday live in a world where you don't have to destroy things, where you can actually build things. It's such a cool character concept. And again, your dreams can be, should be kind of open-ended enough that there's a lot of different choices you could make that could be going for your dreams. The other thing that's interesting is at the end of a session, you can decide to change your big dream based on what's happened. So maybe you are playing an enforcer and your original big dream was to build rather than destroy. But the person you need to protect died and you weren't able to protect them. And now you're going to change your big dream. And maybe now your big dream is to crush everything that is pretty, which is another suggestion they have in there. So again, it gives you so much freedom that as your character grows and changes, you can change these things that you started the campaign with. It's really, really cool. Then the final section is your gear. You start with a D6 of bullets, 2D6 of rations, and a D6 ration water. For this particular one, different classes will have a different number of bullets. And again, D6 means you just roll a D6. And then you can choose a starting weapon, which I won't go into. So yeah, like that is the entirety of your character, and you can build the entire thing with just these 2 pages. Again, if they just had those descriptions, you build the entire character right here. Nothing else you need to do, and I love that. It's great for just getting people into the meat of the game. I'm not going to go through every single role, but I will read the names of the roles. So again, the first one is Enforcer. Then you have Gearhead. You have a Stalker. Stalkers are effectively the people that go out into the zone, which is everything outside of the arc, and deal with the rot. So they're kind of Ranger-esque. You have the Fixer, which is a used car salesman. You have the Dog Handler, which is exactly what it sounds like. You have a dog. And my favorite thing about this for relationships to NPC, you need to protect. One of the things you can choose for your you need to protect is your dog. Her life is worth that of 10 of these lousy mutants. So in particular, your your dog can be your NPC that you are most attached to that you have to protect. I love that. Chronicler, basically someone that writes things down. They're the only role that doesn't get a starting weapon for free, but they can trade bullets for them. A boss is another one, and then a grunt is the final one. And yeah, again, they're really, really simple. It's really easy to understand what all of these things mean and everything, and yet there's enough open-endedness in the system that you can create very unique, very fun characters with very unique stories that you want to tell. And I like that. Again, I'm not a fan of RPGs that try to kind of micromanage anything. I think it's probably my experience in management. The worst managers in the world try to plan and have rules for every single outcome that is possible. Because they micromanage everything and you can't plan for everything. And the more effort and work that you put into planning for every single outcome that could possibly have, the less work you actually get done. And so I'm not a fan of RPGs that try to create rules for every single situation and every, try to control every single aspect of the character. Oh, you want to stand up? Well, then you need to make a balance roll. Which is done with this, and this number, and you actually have a balance modifier. No, you don't need that specific thing. Oh, you want to take a breath? Well, this is your breath modifier, and it's built off of this attribute and this attribute minus this attribute. It's not fun. There's enough there so that when a ruling needs to be made, you can make a logical ruling. And whatever ruling you make, there's enough of the system there that you can make it make sense and get players to go, okay, that's acceptable. That's the most important part of an RPG. And I'm 100% stealing that from Matt Colville, his video on languages versus rule sets. That he expresses that, and it's such a good description of what an RPG system should do, is just give you enough rules so that when a ruling needs to take place, the GM can make a ruling. There's enough rules there so that there is a logical ruling you can make, and all the players can go, okay, that makes sense. I accept it. That's all you need. And yeah, this chapter kind of shows just how simple this system can be while still letting you really create fun, interesting characters. So that's chapter 2. Moving on. Chapter 3, Skills. This is interesting because skills are not like skills as you see in D&D, where skills in general are things you use outside of combat, and then like abilities are things that you use inside of combat. Skills in this game are how you interact with the world. And to kind of explain it, I'm actually going to read what the basic skills are. These are the basic skills. Every single character can use these skills. It doesn't matter what your role is. And you can improve them when you level up. The basic skills are Endure, Force, and Fight, which are all strength-based abilities. Sneak, Move, and Shoot, which are agility-based abilities. Scout, Comprehend, and Know the Zone, which are wits-based abilities, and Sense Emotion, Manipulate, and Heal, which are empathy-based skills. I'm sorry, not abilities, skills. And the interesting thing about this, I've mentioned this before when I talk about D&D. The different attributes, when you translate them to skills, are weighted very, very differently. Most intelligence-based skills are never going to give you a mechanical benefit in anything. They are knowledge. Knowledge is power, don't get me wrong, but intelligence-based skills, other than investigate is the one thing you can use to find traps or other things like that. Otherwise, all other intelligence-based skills are lore. Constitution has no skills associated with it. There are no Constitution rolls. Constitution is exclusively used as a saving throw, generally against poison or cold, and to determine your hit points, and that's it. That is the entirety of the skill. Agility, on the other hand, relates to your initiative. And this is all D&D 5e, by the way. Agility relates to your initiative. It relates to your stealth. It relates to sleight of hand. It relates to a bunch of different tools uses. Strength translates directly to athletics, which turns into a bunch of things. So different attributes in 5th edition D&D are significantly more useful than other ones. In Mutant Year Zero, each attribute has 3 different things that you use that attribute for, and all of them are useful in a bunch of different situations. Sneak, move, and shoot. You may not be shooting a whole lot if you're an enforcer. You may be someone that just beats the junk out of people. But you will move, and you will probably sneak a fair amount because in the zone, again, that's the barren wasteland outside of the Ark, you're going to have to hide. Fight. You're going to be fighting a lot. Force, forcing things and that's your athletics checks effectively. Know the zone. Scouts. All of these things are things that every single role will probably use in different amounts. And you will use them in combat and out of combat. Like, there's tons of different things. They talk about how dice rolls work. The way that this works is, again, you have your attributes to score, which is anywhere from 0 to 5, or I think 1 to 5. I think if you have a 0 in any attribute, you are broken, and you can't do most of the things. So 1 to 5 in every single attributes. When you first build your character, the lowest your attributes can start is a 2, just so you can't be one shot. You have your attributes, and then you have your skills. And when you roll something, you will use one of those skills to do something. And so, like, if you want to fight is a strength. So let's say you have a 3 in fight and you're an enforcer, so your strength is 5. Your strength started at 5. So you would roll 5 basic dice, and you would roll 3 skill dice. And you roll them all, and then you look to see if one of those 8 dice you just rolled comes up at a 6. And that's how you succeed on things. For each additional 6, you get what's called a stunt. Not to be confused with the fantasy age or modern age stunt system. It's just you get additional things that you can do. And they list them in this chapter. I'm not going to go through all of them. It just means you succeed more. Like for fighting, if you get a stunt, one of the things you can do is you can just do additional damage. And then if you do fail, you can do a thing called pushing, which is basically you pick any of the dice that were not 6s and not 1s, and you can re-roll them. You can do that once, and maybe that next time you will get a success. But for each one that you have, depending on the dice, and that's why it's important to have different color dice, like your basic dice need to be a different color than your skill dice and need to be a different color than your gear dice, so you can tell which ones the ones actually are. And if you roll 1s on either your basic dice or your gear dice, bad things happen. Rolling 1s on your basic dice can cause you to hurt yourself and cause you to get more mutations and things like that. So it's an interesting system. I like it. They explain it really, really simple here. and again, because they haven't introduced what they call conflicts, which is basically combat, they will reference conflicts. Chapter 6 is all about conflicts. They will reference it, but they won't go into significant enough detail to overwhelm you. They just give you enough, by the way, this is how it will work. Don't worry, we'll explain it later. This is what you need to know right now to understand what you're talking about. And then they do have a section that says using normal dice. So if you don't buy the dice specifically for Mutant Year Zero, I think I saw a set of 15 dice, 5 of each color, on the Modifius website for, I think it's like $12. So not an exorbitant amount, but again, if you're an RPG player, you probably have enough dice, and D6 are cheap enough that you can get 15 different color, or you can get 3 sets of 5 different color D6s for less than $12. But it's nice to use the ones there because they do have the cool symbols on there that are kind of fun. So yeah. So yeah, they talk about, rolling too bad on a push can mutate you. They talk about gear bonuses. They talk about modification, which is basically in certain situations you might modify things. Which basically means on a modification, you either add or reduce the number of skill dice you roll. Never affects your basic dice, which is entirely based on your attributes. It's just your skill dice. And an interesting thing in this is you can have both positive and negative modifications, and they kind of add into each other. You can never have more than a plus or a -3. The interesting thing is if you have a negative modification after everything's figured out, let's say you have a -1 to the roll, that means you roll, but then you roll an additional skill die as a negative skill die. And what happens is if that gets a 6, it cancels out one of your other 6s, which is interesting, to be blunt. Like I've worked with, advantage disadvantage systems. Like Open Legend has an advantage disadvantage system where they're additive, so you can have advantage 2, disadvantage 3. That means your roll, you're technically at a total of disadvantage 1. I've never had one where you actually subtract a number from where you subtract a number from or you subtract a die or anything like that. I think it's an interesting system. The other thing that I really like is at the very end of this chapter, or end of this section, they have a thing that says chance of success. Okay, so a little bit of math, a little bit of statistics. On a D6, you have a 1 in 6 chance of rolling any number. Because you only succeed when you roll a 6, that means for any one die, you have roughly about a 17% chance of succeeding on any one die. Now, when you start dealing with the statistics of multiple die rolls being put together, things can get confusing very, very quickly. So they actually have a little table here that gives you the chance of success on your initial roll and the chance of success on a pushed roll. They don't explain the math behind it, which is probably a good idea because statistical math is not fun. But they do go, like, if you're rolling 5 dice, so that could mean you have a 3 for your attribute and you have a 2 for the skill, so it'll give you 5 dice. You have roughly a 60% chance of succeeding based on one of those dice giving you a 6. So that little table is really, really nice because a lot of people will look at, well, I'm rolling so many dice, I'm never going to be able to figure out whether or not I can do this or if this is something that I should be worried about. Whereas when you're doing a D20 plus a modifier, it's really, really simple to figure out what your odds are. D20 is based on 5% intervals. And if you know what the DC is, you can go, okay, I need to roll a 10 or higher. You know, it's super, super easy math to do. D6s are not easy math. 17% is a prime number. 17 is a prime number. It is a weird number to work with. Yeah, I like that they added that table, I guess is all I wanted to say. And then they talk about helping others. They talk about simultaneous actions. And then they explain the basic skills and explain what successes are and failures are for each one of these skills. And they give you example stunts for each one of the skills, which is really nice. And again, is really, really simple to use. This would definitely be a page in the book that while you're playing, I think most players would have bookmarked or something, just so when they do get stunts, they can just look down and go, oh, I can use it for this. Pretty easy. Then they go through the specialist skills, and they talk about, you know, the different stunts, and it works just the exact same way. So, yeah, that's chapter 3. Chapter 4, Talents. This is the main way that you're going to customize your characters, through talents. Talents, again, when you first build your character, you have a choice of one of 3 talents based on your role. To give an example, the Enforcer's talents. The first one that they have is called Barge Through. And this is where I get a little bit annoyed about the fact that how simple that is. Could have been printed on the roll page, and they didn't, because Barge Through is literally you can move using strength instead of agility. That's all it is. And it gives you a pretty good idea of how talents work. Either they're going to give you a way to use one of your attributes, or they're going to give you something new that you can do. Again, each role has 3 talents that only that role can ever have. And then after you get through all of those, really? Stop it. After you get through all of those, you get to general talents, which there are a lot more. And again, to give you an example, like one of the general talents is called Assassin. When you shoot someone and hit, the target suffers 1 extra point of damage, but only if you fire at near range or at arm's length. So it has to be close, but that's how Assassin works. Another one, Zone Cook, is another talent. You've mastered the art of cooking contaminated food from the zone well enough to purge it from the rot. You can also purify contaminated water. Roll to know the zone. Every success roll purifies 1d6 of rations of grub or water. So you can create your own grub or water in the middle of the zone, which rot is an aspect that you have to deal with. I don't know. I don't think they've actually explained rot yet in this, but it's exactly what it sounds like. It's rot. It's, you know, bad stuff that makes you worse off. And so, like I said, there's not a ton of general talents. There's basically effectively 2 pages, each having about 2 columns of different talents that you can, general talents that you can use. But it gives you enough that you can kind of customize your character and turn them into something unique and interesting. I don't think there's not enough that you're ever going to get to the point where it's like, oh, I got to pick a talent again. I guess I'll pick this one. Because anytime you level up, you have a choice between improving a skill or choosing a talent. So you can level up quite a few times before you start getting to the point of where, you know, I guess I really don't have a talent that I really want to have for my character. And obviously, if you get rules expansion and stuff like that, I would assume, I haven't read any of the other ones yet, I would assume they introduce new general talents that you might be able to do between different books and things like that. So anyway, it's a decent enough system, and that's chapter 4. Chapter 5, Mutations. This is really, really cool. So, mutations. Mutations, again, are random. You don't get to choose them. You can buy a mutation deck if you want to do that. Otherwise, they have all the mutations listed here. They actually have kind of a cool way of doing them. You roll, they call it roll a D66 is what they call it. And what that means is you roll 2d6. One will be the tens digit. One will be the single digit. And so the thing that you're rolling on only has 11 through 16, 21 through 26, and it goes in those groups of 6 because you don't have zeros and you don't have 7s, 8s, or 9. So I thought it was interesting that that's how they did it. The thing with mutations, in order to activate a mutation, you need to use mutation points, which you effectively, at the beginning of every session, you have as many mutation points as you have mutations, and then you can win more mutation points by pushing a dice roll. So you can get more mutation points depending on what happens if you push something. So that's the basics of how mutations will work, and whenever you use a mutation, you have to roll a basic die for each mutation point you use to activate it. And if you roll a 1 on it, which is the biohazard symbol, the 6s aren't biohazard, the 6s are radiation, is the radiation symbol. 1s are biohazard. You roll a biohazard, the mutation misfires, and it does what it's supposed to, but something else happens as well. And it's interesting, to say the least. And then they talk about getting new mutations and things like that. And then they go through the mutations. Again, there's not a ton of mutations, but again, they're distinct enough that they're interesting. To give you some examples, like one of the mutations is acid spit, and there's actually 3 different things that you can use it for. You can spit acid as an attack. You can use it to melt like ropes or bars or a small object, or you can use it to open a lock. So those are different ways that you can use acids to spit. Now, one of the reasons though they recommend using a deck instead of rolling is for the deck, when you get a mutation, you keep that card. So if you're using the deck, no one can have the same mutations. It also means as more mutations happen, less mutations are available for other people. And they do make mention in here of if you are rolling, if you're not using the deck, we recommend re-roll any mutations that someone in the party already has. So every single character is going to have unique mutations. And there's a lot of different things. Like there's things that you would expect, things like flame breather. You can kind of guess what that is. Or human magnet. But you also have things like insectoid. And you're like, well, what does insectoid mean? Well, you can harden your skin, or you can climb completely vertical surfaces for a few minutes, or quickly heal light wounds. Things like that. That's part of insectoid. So each one of these mutations does give you a pretty unique change to how your character plays. And when you first start the game, you will start with at least 1 mutation. When you build your character, you actually do have the choice of getting a second mutation at character creation, but it reduces one of your attribute scores. It permanently reduces one of your attribute scores. So it's scores. So it's kind of that given to take thing. And I like that. I think it's really, really cool. the number of mutations here is impressive, to say the least, and they all again are generic enough that you can flavor them however you want, and a lot of they give you a lot of choices as far as how you want to use them in the game, and they are kind of the real driving force of the kind of weird things you can do in this. And again, the thing that's most interesting about this is none of these are things that you're ever going to pick for your character. You just get them. And I like that because it makes it so that part of playing this game is kind of reacting to the fact that, well, now you have telepathy. That is part of your character. It doesn't matter that you're an enforcer. You were trying to build them, really, really tough. And one of your inherent mutant abilities is you're also telepathic. And that can turn into a really interesting character concept that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. Like, you think of telepathy, you think of, spellcasters and people that fight from a distance. You don't really tend to think a whole lot of, the psychic punch dude. So yeah, I think it's a really, really cool system. Like, the mutation system, I think is excellent. And it's one of the things that really sold me on this system. Moving on. Chapter 6. Conflict and Trauma. Conflict is combat. This is the combat. This is the combat chapter. And again, it's a pretty simple system. Something that I really, really like about this, and I've mentioned this before, I will always bring this up with the Power Rangers RPG, the Essence system. The idea that they call what would be called like bonus actions or minor actions in other RPGs, they call it a free action, and it's not free. It annoys the hell out of me. In this system, any round of combat, you are allowed to perform one action and one maneuver, or two maneuvers. An action is rolling for a skill, which is basically doing something, or activating a mutation. Those are the two things you use your actions for. A maneuver can be moving, can be looking for cover, getting an item off the ground, drawing a weapon, aiming with a gun, reloading a gun, things like that. So you have major actions and minor actions, and one of the minor actions is moving. Distance in this is not measured in feet or yards in general. You have effectively 5 different distances. You have arm's length, near, short, long, and distant. And depending on which distance you're in, you have different things that you can do. I'm a big fan of more generalized distances. They use it in the age system, both fantasy and modern age. They use it in the Cypher system. I get people that like the D&D and Pathfinder style, where it's like, this has a range of 100 feet, and each square in the battle map is 5 feet and things like that. I totally get that. I'm perfectly fine with it. Again, I like that aspect of D&D 5th edition. It does mean you can be much more tactical when you're playing, and it does mean that using battle maps and things like that is very advantageous in a system like that. This, you can use battle maps, but they're not going to be quite as necessary as in another system where you actually need to worry about specific feet or yards or things like that. So I am a big fan of that. They talk about how to retreat and things like that. They have rules for ambushes and sneak attacks. They're a little bit confusing to me. I don't 100% understand them. And they don't really give... This is one of the few points where they don't give an example of an ambush or a sneak attack, and I really think this could use an example section for that. But and then they have social conflicts. So you have combat conflicts, then you have social conflicts, which work very similarly, but it's social instead of that, which is, again, another system that I really like. I like the fact that arguing with someone and getting into a fight with someone can use the same basic rule structure. but have very, very different ways to interpret how it works. So that's cool. I always love stuff like that. And then they talk about, you know, defenses, grappling. Basically, this is how combat works. It's a pretty easy to understand system. They talk about weapons and things like that in here. Then they talk about, you know, trauma, which is basically your damage and things like that. They talk about being broken. If basically anytime you take damage, it's going to affect one of your attributes. Generally, just generic damage is going to reduce your strength. So strength is effectively your hit points as well. And if you get down to 0 strength, you are knocked out. You are unconscious. Whereas if you get down to 0 agility, you're just physically exhausted. Or if you get down to 0 empathy, you break down in fear, self-pity, or sorrow. And when broken, you cannot use any skills, perform actions, or activate mutations. You can, however, perform 1 maneuver per turn. So you could move or run away or something like that. But for the most part, in a conflict, you can't do anything once you are broken. So yeah, like I said, most like physical damage is going to be taken out of your strength, but agility damage exists, wit damage exists, empathy damage exists, and all of them, when they get to 0, can basically prevent your character from acting. And then getting back up, each attribute has a different way that you restore points to that, which I really, really like. And then they also have this system where you get critical injuries. If you're broken by damage, like your strength, you actually get a critical injury, which they have a whole list of them. Some of them are lethal, some of them are not. And like if you get a sprained ankle, you get a -1 to move and sneak, and it will heal itself over a d6 days. So you can do that, or someone can try to heal you. However, you can have a bleeding gut, which you suffer 1 point of damage for every roll you make to force, move, or fight. And it has a healing time, but it has a time limit of d6 hours. If you are not healed within a d6 hours, so roll, okay, this particular one, if you're not healed within 4 hours, you're dead, because that's lethal. And different injuries have different amounts of time that you can survive without it killing you. And if it's not lethal, there's a time period of, well, if someone doesn't heal you in this time period, it will heal itself. And if it is lethal, they have a time period of, hey, if it's not healed by someone in this time, you're just dead. So I think that's kind of interesting. And then there's some conditions, things like starving, dehydrated, hypothermic, sleeplessness. They're all related to one of the attributes. And then they actually have booze specifically is something that's used in here to dull pain and remove doubt, which I think is interesting. And then they have some rules about darkness as explosion and vehicular combat, stuff like that. So yeah, that's chapter 6. Overall, like I said, it's detailed enough. So again, if someone needs to make if a GM needs to make a ruling, they can make a ruling, and people go, okay, that makes sense. But it's not so complex that you have a rule for absolutely everything you ever gonna need to do. Moving on. Chapter 7. The Arc. This is the other cool thing about this system. The Arc is effectively its own character. And it, quote unquote, levels up with your characters. Again, at the beginning of every session, you'll have assembly. Your characters will kind of pitch an idea of, this is what I think needs to be done. All your player characters can agree that this is what needs to be done, or each one can suggest something different, and that will change how difficult it is to get that project finished. And when the project is finished, it actually improves the arc. Again, you get to choose your type of arc. To give you a couple examples of stuff, you can have airplane wreckage. You could be on a farm. You could be at a subway station, a small island. You know, all these different things. That can be what your arc is. They do tell you to draw a map of the arc. If you're using something like a virtual tabletop, you can do that in something like Roll20. Like most of them have the ability to draw, and then after everyone has kind of drawn on it, as a GM in Roll20, you can just select everything they drew, and put it into the the map layer, and that way that becomes permanent, and then you can put tokens and stuff like that on top of it. So yeah, I mean that's kind of cool. The Elder is the one person that's over the age of the 30. And then you have to define the bosses for it. They give you some examples of different bosses that might exist, because again, your population, again, they generally recommend to be around 200 people. So there's enough people that you can form kind of different social groups and different gangs and stuff like that, but not so much that it seems overwhelming. You still know just about everybody. You should recognize everybody in your 200 person population without too much difficulty. And then the other thing that's really important, you have to declare a water source. They give you examples of that. And then they talk about development levels and the season. You also need to pick a season because that'll change how survival works. And development levels, there's 4 different things that you measure. Your food supply, your culture, your technology, and your warfare. Because, again, because of the survival aspect of this, people will be coming to attack, monsters from the zone will come in and try to attack, or there's other people that are not a part of the arc that are out there that may try to attack. So warfare is something that it is. And yeah, depending on the development levels, different things happen. Like your food supply is going to directly impact how many people die at the end of a session. There's a thing at the end of the session called the session body count, which is how many people in your arc have died that session. Food supply is one of the things that affects that. Culture is another thing that can make changes, and technology is pretty self-explanatory. Warfare is pretty self-explanatory. And then yeah, they talk about the different projects. They give a list of a bunch of different projects. They give a system for how much work it takes to get the projects done. And part of that is in order to do work points, is what you use to build projects. The PCs actually have to spend part of their day when they're in the arc actually working on one of these projects in order for it to get done, and they actually make rolls in order to see how they did to do. So there can be multiple things happen at the same time, and once one of these projects gets done, it affects how the arc works. Some examples, things like you can add defenses, you can add cropland, you can add a temple or a museum, you can add a theater, you can make a militia. All these things affect different aspects of the environment in the arc, and it's a really cool system. Yeah, like there's a long list of projects that you can make, and some of them require previous projects. Like it's really a cool system. Yeah, without going into too much detail, the other aspect of this is they have a section called attacks against the arc. Every so often, the arc is going to be attacked by whatever is out there. It might be, zone ghouls. It might be, random, people in the outside. There's a bunch of different situations where the arc gets attacked, and your warfare development level is going to directly affect how it works. And depending on the rolls that you guys make. You may succeed and you get rid of whatever's trying to kill you. They may succeed and just run rampant through your city, killing a bunch of people, destroying a bunch of projects, things like that. Like, it's a cool system. The arc is its own character, and I love it. I think it's just really, really cool. So that's chapter 7. The final chapter of the player section, chapter 8, Zone Travel. This is effectively, so the kind of big motivation for this is, again, that idea of Eden is this place that they want to eventually find. It is a paradise as far as they're aware, and that's kind of the group thought. And so in order to find Eden, you have to go out into the zone. The other thing that you can find in the zone are what are called artifacts, which is stuff from the old civilization, basically the world before nuclear war destroyed everything. So going out into the zone is where you're going to be able to find artifacts and hopefully find clues for eventually finding Eden, which is the major meta plot of the game. So the map itself is set up in a grid system. Each grid takes a certain amount of time to travel. This basically just explains how zone travel works. And as you explored things like that, you're encouraged to kind of make marks on the map to go, oh, we found this here and then this here. Because that's what your players are doing, is they're going out and they're effectively mapping this as a zone. And then in the Dead Apple, that's what it's called. The two example zones that they give. The first one is called the Big Smoke, and that's post-apocalyptic London. And the second one's called the Dead Apple. Guess what the Dead Apple is? The Dead Apple is New York. And it's really, really cool that you build this map and then you go out and you explore sections, and depending on what you find out there, you can explore different sections. You can just go out and scouting. You can do what are called zone expeditions. And you can basically send people out to these zone expeditions to do things. So yeah, and then the other thing they finally explain here is the rot. The rot is, just the bad stuff out there. And anytime you're in the zone, you start developing rot points, which cause bad things to happen to your character. And depending on how bad there are 4 different levels of rot. There is 0, where there's no rot. There's 1, which is weak rot. You gain a rot point for every day you're in there. Strong rot, you get a rot point for every hour you're there. Or a hot spot, where you get a rot point every minute you're there. And rot points are bad. Rot points can become permanent. Yeah, there's just it's a system that anytime you're out in these as a zone, the longer you're out there, the more dangerous it becomes, which I think is really interesting. And yeah, that is chapter 8. That is the end of section 1, the players section. Yeah. So overall, like I said, the player section, it gives a really, really good idea about how the game is played. You can read it from beginning to end and not feel super, super confused, which I can't say about all RPG books. And yeah, everything about this, I understand how this game is going to play, and I can feel confident in going, okay, I know what it's going to be like to play this game just from reading the book. So I like that. Moving on to section 2. This is just for GMs. Again, I'm not going to go into specifics here. This is probably going to be a lot shorter than section 1 was, because I don't want to give away anything about the lore of this. But I am going to go through each chapter. So if you're a player, this is the first time where I can actually say, if you're a player, congrats, you're done. None of this stuff is going to be for you, because this is a part of the book you're not even supposed to read. So I think that's cool. So moving on. Chapter 9. Your job as Game Master. Again, there's a chapter like this in every single RPG where they basically go, this is what a Game Master does. However, just like the What is an RPG chapter 1 in this, it weaves in the idea of you being a game master as a whole, and this is how you game master this particular game. The first thing they talk about, the first thing they tell you in game principles is 1, everything rots. So that is directly tied to this game in particular. Overall, this first couple pages where it's just talking about kind of the main ideas of the GM, some of the things are very, very much like, if you've got it, you're a target. That is very much specific to this kind of genre of things. However, there's other things like the players lead the way, the players have the answers. There's these other sections where it talks more about things about that you can use as just a GM in general. That I like. So this is another one where even if you're not going to run this game, it's not a bad idea to kind of read through the whole thing. Even the sections that won't apply because you're not running a post-apocalyptic survivor style of a thing, they're going to give you some interesting stuff to think about as a GM. The next section here, they talk about events in the arc, and these are just kind of generic things that can happen when the players are going. These are things that you can kind of insert into the story to give some conflict, to give, some story progression. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative, but all of them are going to get the plot moving and make sure that the players get a chance to continue on their personal stories and the stories of the arc in general. Then they have another section, events in the zone. And again, some of these are going to be more combat focused. Not really, I guess. Most of these are going to be like survival. Like one of them is called a hard choice. Take a guess exactly what they're talking about there. So again, all of them are generic enough that you could introduce the same events multiple times and they're still feel very, very unique each time. Each one of the event has like 3 kind of descriptions that you can use to kind of flavor it. Yeah. And then it talks about like your first session, preparing for sessions, how to build non-player characters. This is something that I really, really like. For me, because I like to be a very improvisational DM, I do prep work. I don't think you can GM without doing at least some prep work. But most of my prep work is kind of building the world and understanding how the world itself is going to react to the players, and then letting them do whatever they want and reacting to it. I'm a very reactive GM because I feel that it gives my players the most command over their own stories. So being able to make NPCs really, really quick and easy, like on the fly, is really useful. And they've got a really nice little... they've got a really, really nice little table that you can use to just make kind of generic NPCs really quick, really easy. And then it gives some examples about stuff that you can do, like what's his name, what does he look like, and how does he act, what does he want, stuff like that can help you flesh them out really, really quick and easy. So I always like things like that where it's a really simple starter set that you can modify as much or as little as you will want. And then they have a section on fine-tuning the opposition. You're just kind of modifying things to make it even more kind of custom. Dealing with resources. Is again another thing. They have a bunch of tables that will give you kind of pre-built random NPCs that are already there. And yeah, that's the whole thing. Again, so it boils down the idea of this is what game mastering is, and this is how you game master this particular game all at once, and it does it pretty well. I like it. I think it's a good chapter. So that's chapter 9. Moving on. I think this may be my new longest in-depth review. Chapter 10, Threats Against the Ark. They actually have a threat deck that, again, you're supposed to use. Again, you can just roll on a table. These are the threats they talk about. And these are things that are threats against the Ark itself. So there are things like the hunger is one of the threats that can happen, which is basically hunger is becoming an issue for the Ark. This is an instigator that turns into a larger conflict. How are you going to solve it? Again, they're generic enough that, again, whatever story you're telling, you can insert one of these threats instantly and not feel like it's going to derail your story. It's always going to help you keep telling more of the story that you will want. Yeah, some of them are really, really cool. Like one of them is called Starfall. A meteor falls, and you know, the Ark has to deal with that. And yeah, that's the entire chapter is there. Effectively, the way that threats are supposed to work is at the start of every session, you're supposed to draw a new threat card. And there's a couple different ways that you can deal with the threats. One, you can let a player draw the threat card and read the text out loud. You can draw the threat card yourself without revealing its contents, or you can deliberately choose a threat card rather than picking one randomly. So, depending on how much agency you want the players to have, you can let them choose the threats, or again, roll in the threat table and then understand it themselves. You as the GM can randomly choose one, or you can choose one specifically that makes sense. And that's going to be the thing that they have to deal with in that particular session. And yeah, I mean, that's it. It's a really simple system. And again, this is something that this threat system can be used in any RPG. The threats that are listed here are very specific to a survival, resource limited style system, but you can use this this kind of threat system in literally any campaign. So learning how to template is really useful. So yeah, that is chapter 9 or chapter 10. Sorry. Chapter 11, Creating the Zone. Again, this is just about, the zone, which is everything outside of the Ark. This is giving you not only a way for you to be able to build your own zone however you want, but it also will give you ruins. So ruins are going to be kind of your little dungeon delve type things. So these ruins are going to be where players can find artifacts. They're where players can find clues that will eventually lead them into the meta plot. They're kind of a big deal. They're also things that you might be able to find supplies. They might be something you can use for a project a little later on. Like there's a bunch of different things, and they have all these different random tables that you can use. Again, very useful for someone like me that likes to be reactive. If your players just decide, we're not going to be in the arc today, we're going to be going and just exploring, you can literally just roll on these tables and go, okay, well in this sector you found a mall. What do you want it to do? Stuff like that. They talk about rot level. They talk about threat level. And then this is also the section where you get the different threats that you might deal with. They have they don't actually list, like this isn't the monster manual section. They do list the various different threats that they might deal with. You have humanoid threat, monster threat, and then phenomenon threat, which I really, really like. These are just things like ghost lights or a sinkhole or something like that. So the very environment is something that you sometimes have to fight, which I think is cool and interesting and fun. So yeah, this entire chapter, it's really, really short. It's only a few pages, but it helps you. And again, depending on how you want to run this, you can create your entire map in every single section. You can pre-plan what is in every single section, every single sector, if you want to go that route and use this just as a way for like pre-planning. Or you can decide literally while you're playing, and then as the players are going, again, if you're using a virtual tabletop or even a real one, they can literally just jot down, oh, in this sector we found this, and that can be really rewarding for the players, because they feel that much more a part of this story. So as much as you can plan everything if you want to, I would say it's much more rewarding for everyone to, when they go out, let them literally discover things. Like you might want to choose the sector environment for them. Like, well, this is a desert area and this is a woodland area, but the actual ruins and other stuff that they find in there, let them discover it as they go. Just roll and see what you can find, because yeah, it turns out really cool. So that's chapter 11. Again, these chapters are pretty short because they're mostly mechanical. This is how you work. Moving on to chapter 12, Ruins in the Zone. This gives a little more specifics on the various different ruins. It just basically gives you a paragraph description of what it is. Again, this is mostly like box text that you can use. Like to give you an example, military base is one of the industrial ruins that they can find. And this is the description: a large square courtyard with brick buildings on each side. In the buildings, there are a great number of identical rooms with metal bunk beds. Beyond these buildings, there's a large garage with several burnt out vehicles inside. So it gives you just a really kind of generic, well, this is what you're going to find there, and then let the players explore. Let the players learn. It's like, oh, there's burnt out vehicles. Are any of them salvageable enough? Well, sure. Do you have a gearhead? Have them make a jury rig. Maybe you can get a car or a Jeep or something and bring it back to the Ark, so that you can go further and further out, because now you have a vehicle. And that might inspire a new project. Well, now you have a vehicle. Now you need to figure out how to fuel it and things like that, and to power it. Well, maybe that means we need to build a generator on in there, or maybe you can drive it back so that you can use the vehicle to power a generator, so you can have electric lights or something in your thing. So again, your imagination is the limitation for this, and this is literally just going, okay, this is what each of those things means. So pretty simple, straightforward chapter. Moving on. Chapter 13, Threats in the Zone. This is effectively your monster manual. But the interesting thing about this is, yes, you have specific quote-unquote stat blocks for different creatures you might discover out there. But in addition to that, you also have, monsters and zone spiders, zone wasps, things like that you would find in there. Then you also have the phenomena section, which is things like ghost lights or an inertia field. And they have kind of a similar stat block to the monsters, and they are dealt with in different ways. So having these threats, yes, if you want to challenge them with combat, you totally can. And there's plenty of stuff in here to explain, to give you things that you can just use or that you can template out. But you can also just use these phenomena and challenge their characters to just survive against the elements. And I love that. I think it's really, really cool. They have systems like that in D&D, but they really weren't, in 5th edition at least, they really weren't expanded upon until you got to like Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, 4 or 5 years after the system had already been there. You didn't really have a lot of, I mean, there was some stuff in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but it wasn't great. This, in the first core book, they have ways to have the environment be a challenge for your players, and I love that. I think it's great. And some of the cool things, like one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating, one of the things you can encounter is called Pillars of Light. I'm not going to explain what it is, but you can randomly find these just pillars of light showing up in the middle of the zone, and use that for whatever purposes you want. I think it's really, really cool. The description they give in there is really cool for that. So, yeah, that's chapter 13. Chapter 14, Artifacts. This is your quote-unquote magic item. These are all the different artifacts that you can find, and they're exactly what you would think they are. You can find things like chainsaws or batteries or hand grenades, and that's what a lot of people think of. You can also find things like dress. You can find a dress. You can find energy pills. You can find a comic book, a compass, binoculars. All these different things, and all of these are artifacts because they're from the previous world. And you can keep artifacts, or you can give artifacts to what's called the Dawn Vault, which is part of your arc. And putting artifacts into the Dawn Vault will actually increase part of your development levels. One of the 4 development categories, by donating these artifacts to your Dawn Vault, you can actually improve your arc, which gives them double purpose. Again, part of it is, hey, cool, everybody wants magic items effectively. Everyone wants cool shit, but your players can choose to keep it for their own purposes, or they can give it to the arc and help improve society as a whole. And that can be part of their goals, their big dream. That can be part of dealing with the NPC that they hate or the NPC that they need to protect. Like, there's so many different things that you can use these for. So yeah, and like I said, the whole chapter is just all the different stuff that you can find. They have a huge list of different weapons that you can find in there as well, and different vehicles that you can find. So there's a ton of stuff. It's really, really cool. And yeah, that's chapter 4. Moving on, or 14. Moving on. I'm officially out of water. I'm going to get another one. Because talking is hard when you can't, when you have no bet. Alright, so chapter 15, Special Zone Sectors. Special Zone Sectors are technically the equivalent of little pre-written one-shot adventures, effectively. They have more Special Zone Sectors that you can get on the Modifius website, and if you get the expanded bundle, it comes with a bunch of ones. But these are effectively one shots that you can add to your adventures, and they're built around a specific building or something like that. Like the one that they have in here is called For a Mouthful of Water, and it's basically an introductory adventure that you can use. If you wanted to do like a one shot or something like that, this is what you would do. And it reads just like any other pre-written adventure. And again, and it has maps. This in particular is set in a purification plant, which is where you can get fresh water and things like that. Yeah, it's an adventure. It's a well written one. Like it's pretty interesting. It gives a lot of different things that can a lot of different things that can go. And there's actually multiple special zones. They have this. They have another one that I'm not going to even say the title because it's a little bit spoilery. It seems like they have, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe a little bit more. Yeah. So they have these pre-written adventures that are in here. They all come with artwork that you can give to the players as they're playing. That's the entire chapter 15 is just, little adventures that you can do. And the thing that's nice about it is looking at these over and reading these over again. If you don't want to use any of these, you don't have to. But they give you a really good idea of how to deal with any of these other zone sectors that you have already learned about. Like, if they go to a military base, well, now that you've seen how adventures are built, you can build your own adventure in any of these different zone sectors that they've already described by just looking at these pre-written ones, which is one of the things that I tend to recommend all GMs, even if you're really, really well versed and have played tons and tons of RPGs. If you're learning a new RPG, look at a pre-written adventure for it, because it will definitely teach you what the important things about the system are that you need to focus on. So yeah, that's chapter 15. Finally, chapter 16. Spoilers. I'm actually not going to even read the title to this chapter, because chapter 16 is a huge lore dump in addition to describing like the big primary meta plot. It describes, again, I'm not going to go into any specifics at all. If you're a lore hound, chapter 16 is the chapter that I read everything in. It's a really, really good read. And it's really, really cool. It explains chapter 16 is absolutely essential to read as the GM, because it explains the wider part of the world, and it explains kind of the why behind what are the arcs, what is the arc, what are, where did the mutants come from, who is the elder, all those other things, all of that's explained in chapter 16. And the GM really needs to know this stuff, because again, that idea of the unreliable narrator, the only way that works is if there actually is a true story that the unreliable narrator is falsifying. The unreliable narrator doesn't work if there isn't a truth that they're obscuring. So this chapter is absolutely essential to read. And it's absolutely essential that none of the players read it, because it will change how they play the game. And everything about this chapter is just super, super cool. It explains exactly how we went from the modern time we're aware of to the world that you are dealing with, the year 0 that you're in. It explains everything that happened before year 0. It explains how to kind of thread the meta plot into the game without it feeling obtrusive or without it feeling like you're railroading the players. And it's a really, really, again, if you're never going to run one of these games, reading the section about the meta plot and how to kind of introduce it to the game is a brilliant, absolutely brilliant primer on how to introduce a secret that the players eventually have to uncover. It is really, really well written. And again, even if you're never going to do, or you're going to play the game, but you don't want to use this meta plot, read through it and see how they kind of leave threads in there that will encourage the players without railroading them, without, telling them, well, this is what you need to do. Without doing any of that stuff, it shows you how you can leave little breadcrumbs that will highly encourage the players to investigate this meta plot and to get further invested in it. And it's super, super cool. They have handouts that you can give the players that they can eventually find. There's maps in here for when you start dealing with some of the more concrete aspects of the meta plot. It's just, there's so many cool things in here. Just again, I can't go into specifics about it because it'll ruin everything, but everything about this is super, super cool. And then and then we go to the index. So that is the game. So, final thoughts. Overall, this system is super, super cool. I like the fact that there's enough rules in there so that everything works, but most of the rules are just there to give you just enough so that they can get out of the way of the story that you want to tell. The setting is brutal. This setting itself is stressful. It is despairing. It is exactly what you want out of a post-apocalyptic survivor style thing. Like I said, the secret lore that is built into this, that are for the GM's eyes only. Oh boy, is it good! It is so good. M. Night Shyamalan wishes he could write stuff like this. It's brilliant. It's really fun. It gets it focuses on types of stories I love reading. Overall, I really, really love this book. Again, the whole reason I'm doing this one today is to put out there that this, as of right now, as of when I'm recording this, there's about 20-ish days left of this. So if you watch this and you want to get a really, really good deal on some RPG stuff and not have to pay an arm and a leg for it, pick this up right now. There's a link in the description to the bundle of holding. There are two of them. The one that has this is just called Mutant Year Zero. And then when you go to the page, you'll see a bunch of other buttons just above Mutant Year Zero. There's another one that's called Mutant Year Zero 2, which is their second bundle. And that one includes 2 more core books, and then a bunch of like pre-written adventures and things like that. The starter collection comes with this Mutant Year Zero. The bonus, if you pay more than the recommended amount, again, right now it's about $20 that you have to pay for it, gives you what's called Gen Lab Alpha, which is another independent core book where instead of mutants, you pay anthropomorphized animals in the same world, but you're just at a different part of the world dealing with a very different meta plot, dealing with a very different group of challenges and things like that, and it's super cool. The Mutant Year Zero 2 bundle introduces Mechatron and Elysium, which are 2 more kind of separate core books. Mechatron is based on you being a robot and being part of a robotic society that I believe is at like the bottom of the ocean or something like that. And Elysium is based on you being humans. You're not mutants at all, and you're having to deal with this post-apocalyptic world in a very, very different way without going into too many spoilers. So yeah, you can pick up both of those. I picked up both of them for around like $42. So the cost of a single hardcover copy of this, I got 4 basically 4 core books and a bunch of other kind of supplements and stuff for it. I really, really love Bundle of Holding. Bundle of Holding, if you're ever watching this, I would love to find a way to work with you in some way, shape, or form. I don't know how that would work. I believe Bundle of Holding, just like Humble Bundle, they I believe they donate they donate part of the proceeds to various charities and stuff like that. I have no idea how they figured it out. I know one of them mentioned what was it? No, I can't remember. No, because I bought all these, so they've taken away some of the stuff from mine because I've already paid for it. Anyway, it's a cool thing. I believe. Don't quote me on this. I believe some of it goes to charity. Like I said, don't quote me on that. I can't be 100% certain. But check it out. It's super cool. Otherwise, that is going to be all for me today. As always, again, if you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All of those things are super important. In the comments down below, if you made it this far, let me know, are you guys interested in me doing more Bundle of Holding or Humble Bundle RPG bundles, where I do these in-depth reviews specifically because they're currently on sale? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I'll see you guys in the next time, all right? Bye-bye.